The police officer who wanted to harm his wife, the Gilberto Valle story, a quiet neighborhood, a dedicated police officer, and a family that seemed perfect on the outside. But beneath the surface lay a dark secret that no one could have imagined. This is the story of Gilberto Valle, a man whose online life revealed shocking and disturbing fantasies that turned his world upside down. If you enjoy deep dives into intriguing stories like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating tales from the stranger side of life. Stick around as we unravel the details of a story that blurs the line between thought and action, leaving everyone asking, where should the boundaries really be drawn? When you see an attractive man walking down the street, have you ever wondered what thoughts might be running through his mind as he looks at you? Is it admiration, curiosity, disinterest, or something far darker? One evening, after tucking her baby daughter into bed, a young mother sat down at her computer, ready to steal a moment of peace away from the daily grind of household chores. But her calm shattered the moment she stumbled upon a photo of herself in a bikini on a strange and unfamiliar website. What she found next left her frozen in shock and terror. The comments below her photo were chilling. Strangers, faceless, nameless individuals, had written fantasies about chloroforming her, binding her, gagging her, and kidnapping her, all culminating in a grotesque plan to butcher her and turn her into kebabs. These horrifying words painted a grim and disturbing picture that no one would ever expect to read about themselves. Overwhelmed with fear and disbelief, the woman felt her heart race. But the nightmare didn't end there. What she had stumbled upon was only the beginning of a much darker truth. This unsettling tale centers on a man named Gilberto Valle. Once sworn to protect the citizens of New York as a police officer, Valle was regarded by friends and colleagues as hardworking and dependable. But beneath his badge and uniform lurked a dark and twisted double life that would shock the nation. Dubbed the cannibal cop by the media, Gilberto Valle's arrest unveiled a macabre web of disturbing fantasies and sinister plans. Was he a true monster or merely a man with a horrifying imagination that spiraled out of control? Today, we explore his story to uncover the truth. Born on April 14, 1984, Gilberto Valle grew up in a peaceful middle-class neighborhood in Queens, New York. The eldest child in his family, he witnessed frequent arguments between his parents, which ultimately led to their divorce when he was just 5 years old. Despite this turbulent start, Gilberto seemed like an ordinary child. In elementary school, he was quiet and introverted, often fading into the background. However, as he grew older, his personality blossomed. By high school, he had become well-liked and surrounded by friends. He excelled in academics and played baseball, a sport he had loved since he was 11. But Gilberto's inner world was anything but ordinary. Even as a teenager, he harbored fantasies far removed from those of his peers. His thoughts about girls weren't about puppy love or innocent crushes. Instead, he imagined them restrained and helpless, scenarios that gave him an unsettling sense of fascination. Valle attended a Catholic high school, where he joined the baseball team and even earned a small scholarship. Outwardly, he appeared like any other teenager striving for success, but inwardly, his secret fantasies hinted at the dark path his mind would eventually take. Gilberto Valle's teenage years unfolded during the 1990s, a time when the internet was still a new and exciting frontier. For many young people, it offered an intoxicating sense of anonymity. Logging into chat rooms and forums, anyone could create a new identity and explore a side of themselves that remained hidden in the real world. For Gilberto, this was a gateway into endless possibility and darker discoveries. At first, his online explorations were innocent enough. He spent hours chatting with strangers, captivated by the novelty of connecting with people he'd never meet. But one day, after high school, Gilberto pursued a degree in psychology with a minor in criminal justice. He excelled in his studies, earning high grades and praise from his professors. However, he later confessed that concentrating on schoolwork was often a challenge. The college campus was filled with beautiful young women, and his mind would wander to scenarios where they were not just objects of admiration, but of control. He imagined them bound, helpless, and even cooked, his fantasies becoming increasingly macabre. Despite these dark thoughts, Gilberto appeared to lead the life of an average student. He attended parties, pulled pranks, and made new friends. Yet, while his peers explored relationships and romantic connections, Gilberto never grew close to anyone in an intimate way. His evenings were instead consumed by his computer, where he delved into the vast corners of the internet. It was during one of these late-night sessions that he discovered something that left a profound impact: a fetish website dedicated to fantasies of cannibalism. Here, Gilberto found himself drawn into a bizarre community of like-minded individuals. He realized for the first time that he wasn't alone. The site was filled with stories, fictional but graphic, depicting detailed accounts of capturing and preparing human victims. Some users shared their own fantasies, complete with plans and recipes that turned human flesh into a twisted delicacy. For Gilberto, this was both horrifying and validating. His unsettling thoughts no longer felt isolated. There were others who shared his darkest imaginings, creating a sense of camaraderie in the most disturbing of ways. These late-night sessions would plant seeds that would later grow into something far more sinister, as the line between fantasy and reality blurred in his mind. After stumbling upon these dark corners of the internet, Gilberto Valle began to see himself differently. He no longer questioned whether something was wrong with him. Gilberto registered on the website and chose the username Girl Meat Hunter, a moniker that left little to the imagination. In his profile description, he openly admitted to being interested in fantasies involving kidnapping, abuse, and cannibalism. The site had a disturbing feature that allowed users to post photos of random people, often taken from social media, and ask, "What would you do with them?" The comment sections would then fill with users' darkest imaginings, some graphic and deeply unsettling. While the website emphasized that these were only fantasies, the content revealed a chilling side of human imagination. Gilberto actively participated in these discussions, relishing the chance to express himself freely. Occasionally, he would upload photos of former classmates, inviting others to share their thoughts on his candidate. For Gilberto, this dark online activity became a routine part of his life. Living with his father, he spent his days working as a police officer, occasionally going on dates, and his nights on these disturbing forums. This repetitive cycle continued until he met Kathleen Mangan, a young woman who would change the course of his life. By this time, Gilberto was 25 years old and, by his own admission, still inexperienced when it came to intimate relationships. Kathleen, a recent arrival to New York, had started a job as an elementary school teacher. On their first date, the two discovered they had a lot in common, and their connection was instant. From that moment on, they became inseparable. However, while Kathleen saw their budding romance as a new chapter in her life, Gilberto's mind was still consumed by his fantasies. In his private thoughts, he imagined kidnapping her, binding her, roasting her, and serving her on a platter with an apple in her mouth. These visions haunted his mind, but he knew better than to reveal them to Kathleen. Outwardly, he was the perfect gentleman, careful not to scare her or show any sign of his hidden world. A few weeks after meeting, Gilberto and Kathleen officially began dating. Their relationship progressed quickly, and within a year, they decided to move in together, renting a small apartment in Manhattan. Their lives soon became even more intertwined when they adopted a bulldog, Kathleen's favorite breed, and a nod to her college mascot. The early years of their relationship were marked by joy and companionship. Kathleen described Gilberto as sweet, respectful, and incredibly kind. He rarely argued and always treated her with care. They laughed often, enjoyed each other's company, and built a life together that appeared, at least on the surface, to be perfectly normal. Yet, beneath this veneer of domestic bliss, Gilberto's private fantasies persisted, growing darker with time, even as he played the role of the devoted partner. Caitlin had no idea about Gilberto's dark online activities or the disturbing fantasies that consumed his mind. To her, he was her loving partner, and their life together seemed poised for a new chapter when, in January 2011, Caitlin discovered she was pregnant. Gilberto's initial reaction to the pregnancy was less than enthusiastic. Overwhelmed by the looming financial responsibilities and the idea of raising a child, he was filled with anxiety. The thought of caring for a newborn and the life-altering responsibilities that came with it terrified him. However, as the weeks went by, he began to adjust to the idea of fatherhood. He and Caitlin had long, heartfelt conversations about their concerns, reassuring one another that they would face this challenge together. Over time, Gilberto's apprehension gave way to cautious excitement. He started preparing for his new role as a father, reading parenting books, and making plans for their future. To accommodate their growing family, the couple moved to a larger apartment in Forest Hills. In September 2011, Caitlin gave birth to a beautiful baby girl they named Josephine. Becoming parents should have been a unifying experience, but it did little to change the hidden dynamics of their relationship. Despite the joy of fatherhood, Gilberto did not abandon his secret life. He continued to spend countless hours on fetish websites where he had become a well-known figure. Visitors to the site eagerly followed his detailed fantasies, and in 2012, Gilberto passed the sergeant's exam and threw himself into his work with the NYPD. Caitlin, now a stay-at-home mom, focused entirely on caring for baby Josephine. Around this time, the couple decided to get married, formalizing their long-standing relationship. From the outside, it appeared that everything was falling into place for the young family, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Gilberto's demanding job often left him drained, and he spent little time at home. The burden of childcare and household responsibilities fell almost entirely on Caitlin. Their marriage lacked the intimacy and connection they once had. Caitlin made several attempts to rekindle the spark in their relationship, but every effort ended with Gilberto withdrawing. He frequently escaped to the bathroom, avoiding any physical closeness, and over time, he began avoiding her altogether. Most nights, Gilberto would come home, eat dinner, and retreat to his own world. He played video games, watched television, or scrolled through the internet until the early hours of the morning. By the time he finally went to bed, Caitlin was already asleep, worn out from waiting for him. The emotional and physical distance between them continued to grow, creating a marriage that, while functional on the surface, was hollow at its core. After long, stressful days at the police department, Gilberto sought refuge at home, not confrontation. He didn't want to face Caitlin's reproachful gaze or listen to her concerns about their struggling marriage. Instead, he buried himself in his own world, a habit that would soon shatter the fragile peace in their relationship. One day, Gilberto's computer broke down. While it was being repaired, he hesitated to use Caitlin's laptop to visit the websites he frequented. He worried his browsing history might be saved, leaving behind evidence of his secret life. But his desires got the better of him, and he eventually gave in. One careless moment was all it took. Gilberto not only visited the dark websites, but forgot to close the tabs before heading to work. Later that evening, after putting their daughter Josephine to bed, Caitlin decided to unwind with some time online. She opened her laptop only to stumble upon a collection of disturbing images and unsettling comments in her browser. Shocked and horrified, Caitlin couldn't believe what she was seeing. Up until that point, she had blamed herself for their lack of intimacy, wondering if When Gilberto returned from work, Caitlin confronted him. She explained what she had found, but instead of attacking him, she tried to approach the situation with understanding. She proposed working together to rekindle their marriage, hoping this conversation would bring them closer and shed light on the issues driving them apart. However, deep down, Caitlin suspected there was more to her husband than he was admitting. Her suspicions grew darker. At first, she wondered if he was having an affair. That would at least explain his distance and avoidance. Determined to find out, Caitlin installed monitoring software on his computer to track his online activity. She hoped to uncover a hidden relationship, but braced herself for whatever she might find. What Caitlin discovered was far worse than anything she had imagined. The next day, she accessed the logs and saw a detailed record of the websites Gilberto visited and his online conversations with strangers from around the world. Among these were photographs of acquaintances and friends accompanied by chilling comments. But the ultimate blow came when Caitlin found messages that discussed her. In one conversation, her own photo appeared alongside a disturbingly detailed discussion of what someone planned to do with her, plans that her husband had actively contributed to. Caitlin's fear turned to dread. The man she had shared her life with, the father of her child, was far more dangerous and disturbed than she had ever realized. Her discovery marked the beginning of a terrifying chapter, one that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her husband, bind her legs, slit her throat, and watch the blood flow. This horrifying line was one of many that Caitlin stumbled upon, and it left her utterly stunned. The idea that her husband, the father of her child, could discuss such graphic, violent fantasies about her fate was incomprehensible. The chillingly detailed correspondence felt so real that Caitlin became convinced Gilberto was planning to act on these twisted ideas. Overwhelmed with fear, Caitlin wasted no time. She packed her belongings, gathered baby Josephine, and fled that same day to her parents' home in Nevada, unwilling to listen to any explanations from her husband. Once there, as the initial shock subsided, Caitlin decided to use the monitoring software again to see if Gilberto's online activities had continued. What she found only deepened her terror. More disturbing content had surfaced in Gilberto's communications. His browser history revealed searches for methods of harm, recipes involving human flesh, and even details about cooking a human body. In one chilling exchange with an online acquaintance, Gilberto described preparing a woman with olive oil over an open flame and using her severed head as a centerpiece for the feast. The vivid imagery made Caitlin physically ill. As she dug deeper, she uncovered even more horrifying details. Gilberto had compiled a folder containing photos of over 80 women. Some Caitlin recognized as acquaintances, others were strangers. His messages with users on the fetish site detailed plans for abduction and grotesque acts, often in graphic and methodical detail. Caitlin discovered that Gilberto was incredibly active in this dark community, engaging with at least 24 different users. What terrified Caitlin most was that she herself was frequently mentioned as the intended victim in these sinister conversations. The detailed discussions of her supposed fate left her in no doubt that her life had been at risk. She felt a wave of gratitude for having escaped when she did. Buried within the correspondence, Gilberto occasionally mentioned that these were merely fantasies, dark, hidden desires that he had no intention of acting upon. But, in her state of panic and horror, Caitlin couldn't bring herself to believe this. To her, the sheer level of detail and frequency of these conversations suggested that Gilberto was more than capable of crossing the line from fantasy to reality. Convinced that her husband was dangerous and needed to be stopped, Caitlin resolved to take action. She knew this was no longer just about her safety, but about preventing him from potentially harming anyone else. Caitlin, terrified by what she had discovered, went straight to the authorities. She provided them with all the disturbing messages she had uncovered, explaining that, according to the correspondence, Gilberto had been plotting her abduction and murder. Alarmed by the evidence, law enforcement took swift action. On October 24th, 2012, a team of FBI agents arrived at Gilberto's apartment in Forest Hills to make an arrest. Knowing he was a police officer and might resist, or worse, initiate a shootout, they devised a strategy to apprehend him safely. An agent called Gilberto, claiming someone had hit his parked car. When a confused Gilberto stepped outside in a casual t-shirt and sweatpants, he was immediately surrounded by agents and taken into custody. Gilberto was charged with conspiracy to kidnap and harm others. Over the next 5 months, he remained in jail awaiting trial while investigators delved deeper into his activities. The FBI uncovered emails that detailed specific plans for abductions, and the evidence painted a chilling picture of intent. Moreover, a search of Gilberto's work computer revealed that he had used police resources to access law enforcement databases illegally. This breach was significant as it suggested he was actively gathering information on potential victims. Combined with the graphic nature of his online correspondence, the evidence pointed to a serious threat. As news of his arrest spread, the story captivated the public and media alike. Dubbed the Cannibal Cop, Gilberto's case became the talk of the nation. Reports of a husband allegedly plotting the abduction and harm of multiple women, including his own wife, shocked the public. Details of his chilling online conversations and the identities of those with whom he corresponded began to emerge. The FBI identified 3 individuals who had been in frequent contact with Gilberto during the months leading up to his arrest. Michael Van Hees, a 22-year-old auto mechanic from southern New Jersey, Dale Bollinger, a British national, and Ali Khan, a man from Pakistan. These pen pals had exchanged detailed emails with Gilberto discussing potential victims and methods of abduction. In one particularly disturbing exchange, Gilberto emailed Michael Van Hees photographs of a co-worker named Alicia. Michael suggested abducting her for Gilberto. For a fee of $5,000, Gilberto, risking his law enforcement career, demanded assurances that Alicia would never be found after the abduction. These messages painted a picture of calculated planning far beyond mere fantasy. The case sent shockwaves through the community as the public grappled with the idea. Despite the alarming nature of his communications, the FBI found no physical evidence during their search of Gilberto's apartment to indicate he had actively prepared to carry out these crimes. The oven in his kitchen was of standard size, and there was no chloroform, ropes, or other tools mentioned in his discussions. Furthermore, no coordinates or maps of the secluded mountain location he had referenced were discovered. This lack of physical evidence created a critical divide in the case. Were Gilberto's actions the manifestation of deeply disturbed fantasies, or did they signal true intent to commit unspeakable crimes? The prosecution argued that his detailed planning and misuse of police resources left little doubt. while the absence of concrete preparations suggested otherwise. The line between thought and action became the pivotal question in a case that horrified the nation. The question of whether Gilberto Valle's disturbing online activity was mere fantasy or the groundwork for an actual abduction remained unresolved. On December 31st, 2012, his attorneys requested that a court-appointed psychiatrist conduct a thorough evaluation to determine whether Gilberto's online persona could translate into real-world actions. The psychiatrist's role was critical, to assess whether there were any psychological preconditions that suggested he might act on his fantasies. The doctor began by reviewing Gilberto's psychological questionnaire, which he had completed during the NYPD recruitment process. This evaluation, a standard tool, was designed to identify personality traits, detect potential mental pathologies, and assess an applicant's ability to handle stress and the pressures of police work. The psychiatrist's sessions with Gilberto lasted 3 days, totaling approximately 18 hours of in-depth conversations. During these sessions, Gilberto candidly discussed his intimate life, starting from his teenage years. He described himself as a shy and reserved individual, often too embarrassed to share his thoughts with anyone in his real life. The internet, however, had provided a platform for him to connect with strangers who shared his unconventional interests. Once he began engaging in these discussions, he felt swept up by the anonymity and freedom the online world offered, which made it difficult for him to stop. The key question everyone awaited was whether Gilberto's fantasies could manifest in real life. Did his detailed online conversations represent genuine intent to harm his wife and other women he discussed, or were they purely fictional? After the evaluation, the psychiatrist delivered a surprising conclusion. According to the doctor, Gilberto showed no signs of any diagnosable mental disorder and came across as a pleasant, even positive individual. While his fantasies were undoubtedly dark and criminal in nature, the psychiatrist believed there was a significant disconnect between his thoughts and real-world actions. For Gilberto, the act of discussing these ideas and sharing them with others online seemed to be the extent of his engagement. The psychiatrist expressed confidence that Gilberto's behavior was limited to the realm of fantasy. While disturbing, these conversations were, in his opinion, unlikely to lead to real-world harm. The findings painted a complex picture of a man whose internal world was filled with darkness, yet whose outward demeanor and psychological profile suggested he was incapable of acting on his twisted imaginings. However, whether this assessment would sway the court and the public was another matter entirely. The line between disturbing fantasies and criminal intent had rarely been so scrutinized, and Gilberto's case continued to provoke questions about the boundaries of thought, speech, and action. The psychiatrist's findings revealed no behavioral precursors suggesting that Gilberto Valle intended to act on his dark fantasies. This conclusion was exactly what his defense team had hoped for and became a cornerstone of their strategy. Armed with the expert's assessment, Gilberto's attorneys prepared to argue his case in court. The trial began in February 2013, addressing 2 separate charges against the former police officer. The first, conspiracy to kidnap, carried a potential life sentence. The second charge, unauthorized access to the Federal National Crime Information Center, NCIC, database, could result in a maximum of 5 years in prison. The case was unique because all the evidence presented against Gilberto was based on his online conversations, his thoughts and fantasies rather than action. The defense team focused on this distinction, emphasizing that while Gilberto's interests and discussions were undeniably disturbing and morally repugnant, they were not criminal acts. No actual harm had occurred. The attorneys pointed out that the charges largely rested on email exchanges between Gilberto and his friends from an online fetish community. They presented evidence from Gilberto's website profile, which explicitly stated that the content he shared was purely fantasy and not intended to reflect real-world actions. The defense further argued that Gilberto had made hypothetical plans, but never attempted to carry them out. For instance, correspondence showed that Gilberto and his online associates had discussed abducting 3 women on President's Day. However, the holiday had long passed and all the supposed victims were alive and unharmed. The defense claimed this demonstrated that the discussions were nothing more than fantasies confined to the virtual world. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They described Gilberto as a man whose obsession had spiraled out of control. The fact that he had used the NYPD database to search for personal information including addresses of women he discussed online, was presented as evidence of intent. This access to sensitive information, the prosecution argued, indicated preparation for real-world actions. The trial took an emotional turn when Caitlin, Gilberto's wife, testified against him. Her testimony highlighted the terror she felt after discovering her husband's disturbing conversations. Following her testimony, Caitlin filed for divorce, took custody of their young daughter, and severed all ties with Gilberto and his family. Her actions underscored the gravity of the situation and the impact it had on her life. Throughout the trial, Gilberto maintained his innocence, asserting that his chat messages were nothing more than fantasy and that he never intended to act on them. The case was deeply polarizing as it raised complex questions about the boundaries between thought, fantasy, and criminal intent. In his closing argument, the prosecutor offered the jury a vivid analogy. He compared Gilberto's fantasies to those of a chef obsessed with poisoning customers. If patrons discovered that the chef at their favorite restaurant spent his days researching poisons and detailing plans to slip them into meals, would they still trust him with their food? The prosecution argued that intent and preparation, even if not fully executed, were enough to establish the risk of harm. The jury was left to grapple with this delicate and unprecedented case, weighing the evidence of Gilberto's dark inner world against the lack of any tangible actions in the real world. The analogy of the chef claiming his poison fantasies were just dark thoughts lingered in the courtroom as the trial of Officer Gilberto Valle unfolded. Lasting just over a month, the trial concluded on March 12, 2013, when the jury delivered its verdict, guilty on charges of conspiracy to kidnap and harm others, as well as unauthorized access and misuse of law enforcement databases for personal purposes. The conviction brought an immediate end to Gilberto's career with the NYPD. Many of his colleagues and family members were deeply unsettled by the verdict, believing it set a troubling precedent. To them, it seemed Gilberto was being punished not for actions, but for his fantasies and unsettling thoughts. They argued that while his desires were undoubtedly unconventional and disturbing, he had not physically harmed anyone or directly violated the law in connection with the charges. However, the jury was convinced otherwise. They believed that Gilberto's fantasies were not as harmless as his defense suggested. The prosecution had painted him as a man whose dark desires were escalating, an addiction that would inevitably push him to cross the line into real-world harm. In their view, it was only a matter of time before his plans turned into actions. Shortly after his conviction, Gilberto filed an appeal, arguing that his sentence was unjust and unsupported by concrete evidence of criminal intent. More than a year later, in June 2014, a federal district court judge overturned his conviction for conspiracy to kidnap and harm. The judge ruled that the evidence did not sufficiently prove Gilberto's online communications were anything more than a form of fantasy role-playing. The judge characterized Gilberto's correspondence as deeply disturbing but ultimately protected speech, noting that the messages lacked tangible steps or preparations to carry out the actions described. By this time, Gilberto had spent 21 months in confinement. Following the ruling, he was released on bail to house arrest at his mother's apartment, with bail set at $100,000. As part of the terms of his release, Gilberto was required to wear an electronic ankle monitor and was strictly prohibited from using the internet. Upon leaving the courtroom, the former officer was greeted by his family and legal team. He smiled, embraced his attorneys, and addressed the gathered reporters, apologizing to anyone hurt, shocked, or offended by his behavior. He acknowledged that his actions were immature and thoughtless, but maintained that they were never intended to cause harm. Outwardly, Gilberto presented himself as a reformed and remorseful man, a former officer of the law who had fallen into a dark and dangerous fascination but had never intended to bring his fantasies to life. However, for many, his case left a lingering sense of unease, raising broader questions about the boundaries between thought, speech, and action, and the point at which fantasies become crime. Gilberto Valle was well regarded in his professional life. On duty, he was respected by colleagues and maintained a clean record with no complaints about his work. Known for his cheerful and playful demeanor, he often brought positivity to those around him. In photographs, he frequently smiled, presenting the image of a dedicated and approachable officer. In December 2015, the Second Circuit Court upheld the decision to overturn Gilberto's conviction for unauthorized access to law enforcement databases. All criminal charges against him were dismissed. His attorney described the ruling as not only a victory for Gilberto, but also for society, emphasizing the importance of protecting freedom of thought and expression, even when those thoughts are unconventional or controversial. While Gilberto's case sparked intense debate, the investigation led to significant breakthroughs in law enforcement. The FBI uncovered crucial information about other individuals engaging in concerning activities through the examination of the illegal website. On January 4th, 2013, authorities arrested Michael Van Hees, one of Gilberto's online acquaintances. During questioning, Michael admitted to having troubling thoughts, including inappropriate fantasies involving minors. His wife later revealed that she had known about his preferences before their marriage and had chosen to accept them. Another of Gilberto's correspondents, Dale Bollinger, was apprehended by British authorities. Bollinger had been communicating with an underage girl online and arranged to meet her in person. Before the meeting, he purchased an axe that mirrored his online discussions with Gilberto about similar fantasies. British authorities intervened before the meeting could take place, but the evidence highlighted the risk posed by Bollinger's actions. While Gilberto maintained that his activities were confined to the realm of fantasy, the arrests of others from the website, individuals who had taken steps toward turning their discussions into reality, underscored the concerning potential of such communities. This case became a reminder of the fine line between private thoughts and actions that could lead to harm. Gilberto Valle's actions and online activities were widely interpreted as evidence of intent to cause harm. For those who feared that someone with such dark inclinations might eventually lose control, his case was a troubling affirmation of that possibility. After his release, Gilberto sought to regain custody of his daughter Josephine, or at the very least, arrange visitation rights. However, his ex-wife Caitlin vehemently opposed the idea. She argued that their daughter would one day grow into a young woman, and she could not bear the thought of exposing her to a father whose fantasies might extend to her. While Gilberto initially considered contesting Caitlin's stance in court, he ultimately dropped the case due to mounting legal expenses he couldn't afford. In 2017, Gilberto gave a rare public interview during which he attempted to defend himself. He argued that people do not choose what arouses them and acknowledged that his online messages and preferences seemed strange and frightening to most people. However, he insisted that they were never meant to translate into reality. He emphasized that as a former police officer, he would never have crossed the line into committing actual crimes. Over time, Gilberto found an outlet for his dark thoughts through writing. In 2017, he published a memoir titled Raw Deal: The Untold Story of the Cannibal Cop, which recounted his side of the infamous case. The book provided an opportunity for him to explain his actions and reflect on the personal and professional fallout he endured. In 2018, he released a novel, The Gathering Evil, which told the fictional story of two young New Yorkers targeted by a sinister group of wealthy and influential individuals. Writing appeared to give Gilberto a means to channel his dark fantasies into something creative rather than destructive. Despite losing his career, family, and reputation, Gilberto gained a peculiar kind of notoriety which allowed him to speak openly about his experiences and desires. For some, his openness was a form of catharsis. For others, it was unsettling. The story of Gilberto Valle, the so-called cannibal cop, appears to have reached a tentative resolution. His potential victims were never harmed, and he has seemingly redirected his disturbing inclinations into fiction. However, whether Gilberto can fully suppress his darker impulses in the future remains an open question, one that lingers uneasily in the minds of those who followed his case. The story of Gilberto Valle is a stark reminder of the thin line between thoughts and actions, and how even seemingly innocent platforms can serve as breeding grounds for unsettling desires. It challenges us to question the boundaries of privacy, freedom of thought, and the consequences of living in a digital age where dark fantasies can flourish unchecked. While no one was harmed, the case leaves us with lingering questions about where those boundaries should lie and how society should address such situations. If you found this story thought-provoking, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps bring more unique stories like this to light. Stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time with another fascinating